So a couple years ago, I made a video about whether or not Chris Jones is natural or enhanced, and at the time my conclusion was, I don't know, maybe, who knows. But recently, Chris Jones competed in a natural bodybuilding competition, which gives us some new evidence to analyze, and I thought it would be appropriate to revisit this topic and once again ask the question, is Chris Jones natty or not? So first of all, it's pretty understandable why some people might be suspicious over whether or not Chris is taking steroids. He does look pretty damn jacked, and even compared to guys who have spent years worth of training, they don't have the same quality of physique Chris has. So he's definitely above average, but just being above average doesn't mean you're taking steroids. And Chris Jones is definitely within the natural range. I would say his physique is obtainable for a natural. He's not someone like Mike O'Hearn where it's just physically impossible to get that huge without steroids. So in a situation like this, it's best to look at things like progress. Has Chris made steady, slow progress over the years, or has he just suddenly gained a ton of muscle, which would be a sign of steroid use? And how has his competition prep and this, bodybuilding show he did affect his physique? Because again, steroids do help you maintain fullness while dieting. So we're going to ignore the way he looks for the most part, and we're just going to focus on things like progress and how dieting down really lean affects his physique. Now, Chris has been training for a very long time, and even in his oldest videos, he still looked pretty damn jacked. This video was taken back in 2011, so 7 years ago, and he was still a big, strong guy. When he first showed up on YouTube, he looked like he lifts, and he still looks very similar. I don't think a lot of people are appreciating how little his physique has changed. Now, obviously, he's made some improvements. He's put on a bit more overall mass. He's improved on certain weak points. But for the most part, he's changed very little in overall size. So let's compare his most muscular pose from 7 years ago to his most muscular pose in his most recent competition a couple weeks ago. And as you can see, there really isn't that much difference. He definitely got a bit bigger. You do have to keep in mind he's leaner in the competition photo. But when Chris showed up on YouTube, you can see he was already pretty damn jacked. And he's made relatively minor progress over the 7 years he's been on YouTube. I'd say Chris has made the most amount of improvement to his back. His back was really good before. He had a good rear lat spread, but his rear double bicep pose was a little narrow and flat, and in his most recent competition, you can definitely tell he's added some width and thickness to his back. He has put on a little bit more overall mass, but a lot of his physique improvements have just been, bringing up weaker body parts, and that's the kind of progress you'd expect out of a natural lifter. You won't see them gain a shit ton of overall size. What you'll see is just minor physique improvements over time, bringing up some weaker body parts, and maybe growing a little bit more overall mass very gradually. Now, to contrast this, let's take someone like Brad Castleberry. So this is a photo from his Instagram where Brad claims this is a picture taken from 12 years ago. Now, he was likely on steroids when he took this picture, but, let's be generous. Let's say he's right around his natural limit. So assuming he was natural, you'd expect him to make minor improvements over the coming years. So, maybe he could bring up his legs a little more compared to his upper body. They're maybe a little small. And, maybe he could also grow out his traps and forearms. And this would take several years of training. But instead of seeing these more minor improvements, he just blew up and got absolutely massive. So this isn't the type of thing you see with naturals. If he was natural, he'd make more minor improvements to his physique, but that didn't happen. He just grew all over the place. Another great example of this is Calum Von Moger. So this is another photo on Calum's Instagram. On the left photo, he was 21 years old, and on the right photo, he was 26. So you could argue that Calum Von Moger was actually natural on the left-hand photo when he was 21. He still had a really good, well-built physique, especially for a natural, but if he was natural, you'd expect him to make very minor improvements from year to year, but instead, in only 5 years, he just blew up to insanely, inhumanly huge. And contrast this with Chris Jones. It took 7 years for Chris to make this transformation, but it only took Calum 5 years to make this transformation. So you can see the difference that steroids make. Chris might have an above average physique, but given the progress he's been making, it looks like Chris Jones is natural. He's made slow incremental progress, working on, specific body parts that are minor weak points, and he's only gotten a little bit bigger. And of course, Chris Jones recently had his bodybuilding competition, which is important for this natty or not analysis, because as we all know, when naturals diet down for bodybuilding shows, they get really depleted, they flatten out, they look kind of weak and emaciated, and they can even lose a considerable amount of muscle mass. So it looks like that's actually the case with Chris Jones. When you see him on stage, don't get me wrong, he looks great for a natural, but seeing him on stage, it doesn't really cross your mind, oh, like that guy's on steroids. It looks like he sacrificed the round, bulky, thick look he normally has for the insane amount of conditioning he has. He looks fucking ripped. You can see like the striations in his glutes. That is achievable naturally, but it comes at the sacrifice of size and roundness and thickness. So if Chris was on gear, I'd expect him to be just a little more fuller looking on stage, but on stage, he just looks like a natural. And for comparison, if we take a look at Calum Von Moger from back in 2011, so this footage is from when he was only 21 years old, 2011. He may very well have been natural at the show, because you can see he has that flat, depleted look from dieting to such a low level of body fat. And he actually looks smaller than Chris Jones here, but I think that's just an optical illusion. Calum Von Moger is 6'2", so it takes a lot more muscle mass to fill out his frame, whereas Chris Jones is only 5'7", so I think it's an optical illusion there. If they were both standing side by side, I think Calum would have looked a lot bigger in this show, but still, he looked great for a natural lifter, like a big, strong dude, but, he flattened out from dieting. But if you skip ahead to only 3 years, in 2014, that's not a problem for him anymore. He grew a shit ton, got way fucking bigger, and when he dieted down, he didn't have that flat look. He maintained that round, bulky figure. So, again, you can see the difference steroids make here. The progress Chris Jones is making, it's what you'd expect of a natural lifter. He didn't just suddenly just explode. And when he diets down, he just flattens out like a natural lifter, unlike people, like Calum Von Moger. You should also keep in mind that when Chris stepped on stage, he was only about 175 pounds. He's not that big of a guy. Again, he's only 5'7" inches tall. Short people just have a much easier time filling out their frame and getting that, thick muscular look without actually being all that big. Now, I don't look quite as muscular as Chris, but I'm 6'3", and I probably have bigger measurements than him because of my height. So, Chris Jones might look insanely huge on Instagram, and you might get the idea, oh, fuck, this guy's on roids. But if he's standing next to someone like me who's taller than him and, has a good build, he'd look like a natural lifter. He'd look like a guy who has an above average physique, who's really muscular, but he isn't all that big. He looks like a natural. So with all of this considered, I have to change my opinion. Before I thought, okay, maybe he's on gear, maybe he's natural. But now I'm nearly 100% sure he's natural. Of course, there's always a chance that anyone could be taking drugs, but I don't see any real evidence of it here. But tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think Chris Jones is natty or not? And if you like this video, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. I have some funding perks you may find interesting. If you're looking for clothing, then check out the Vegan Gains store. And of course, be sure to subscribe to my gaming channel, Vegan Gains Live. And as always, keep making those vegan and natural gains.
Beef. What a relief. When will this poisonous product cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. Let us begin now with the cow. The way it gets to your plate and how.